Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a great start to the semester. Dr. Allen here. I'm going to jump right in because if you remember last week, I said I would try to keep these videos short and to the point. Just a couple of things I do want to highlight. One, I recorded that video um, actually over the break. So I think I did rewatch it. So I think I remember everything that I said, but I'll be doing these each week. And if you happen to hear anything rattling in the background, I think it should be okay, but I don't know if the mic's going to pick it up. It's very windy where when I'm recording this morning on the Saturday the 13th. So I just wanted to give you the heads up if you hear something in the background. I don't think it's making the noise right now, but it happens. There's a tree right near my house, and I'm up on the second floor. That has nothing to do with our class, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. A couple things this week, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Hopefully, you had a chance to check out the overview of the class, the book, and things like that. This week, we're going to focus on chapters 3 and 4 of Flat World Education. Uh, Hopefully, everyone's had a chance to look at 1 and 2. And again, just in case you watched this early last week, I'm just going to basically try to give you kind of an overview of some of the things that I've noticed from the readings, because again, I'm trying to keep these to the point, but I think it is important that I give you a little bit of face time and give you my thoughts on what I'm reading. I'm not saying I'm right on everything, but and I'll try to break it down a little bit. We're also going to talk a little bit about culturally responsive teaching. I'm going to see how I'm doing with time. We're going to get into that a little more next week, but I will make sure to at least show you the graph that we're going to be looking at. And of course, you have discussion 2 that's due this week. And I'm going to show you the Zen project assignment if you want to go ahead and get a head start on that. Being a 7-week class, I want to make sure you have time to do everything. So it's something, it'll correlate very well, I think, with next week. Trying to think anything else. I'll be pulling up a few things. Chapters 3 and 4, especially 4, deals a lot with funding. And I think all the concepts that Darling Hammond actually talks about in the book are spot on. Some of the charts, I think the trends can still be seen today. I just want to give you updated numbers on some of that because, like I say, there's a few things as far as like details in terms of numbers and such that I think are getting a little long in the tooth in the book. So with that being said, I'm going to pull up chapter week 2. I think I said this last week. I just blow through with the recordings at this point because if I was teaching this live and I babbled or whatever, I would probably just keep going. So just to kind of keep this to the point, that's what I'll do. So if I say or an forgive me, but we're going to go for it. All right. A few things. A video will be up. If you are interested in a little more detail from her, Linda Darling Hammond, there is a 7-minute video. She talks about some of the concepts in a very concise fashion. There are tons of videos from her on YouTube too, if you want to check it out. This is actually what we're going to look at. I make notes and type some things on the readings. I kind of have them in larger font if you want to check them out or read them. And I'm going to pull them up actually right now. I'm going to talk about chapters 3 and 4. I may make a point or two about chapters 1 and 2, only because I know I talked about it last week, but just to make sure we're on the same page, and it being the first week. And there was something I forgot to mention. Few things. One, this is just chapter 1. But a lot of that I felt like connected back to the Great Society and gave you the backgrounds on some of the policies and things like that. Again, the Great Society was LBJ's War on Poverty. Talks about the Elementary and Secondary Act, which is kind of the root of modern education. At least I believe so. And I don't think most people would argue that point. But I did not make the point. There's another thing that some people may have worked in it. Some people may have policies in it, and it has to deal with students between the ages of 3 and 5. And that is Head Start is actually rooted in the Great Society. And I'm going to put this up when I open this week's up. I'm going to put this up when I open this week's content up. And it's a history channel, but I was doing some work and checking out some stuff for one of my social studies classes, and LBJ and the War on Poverty and such it just gives a nice summative information on the Great Society. So I thought I would go ahead and share that. And it has a little there you go. It talks about education reform. So if you want to check it out, it does mention Sergeant Shriver, which you may be familiar with the Peace Corps. That's what he's most associated with. Or he's associated with being Maria Shriver's father, who was married to Arnold Schwarzenegger. So you may be familiar with that connection. But long story short, Sergeant Shriver was very much a proponent of reforms in a lot of ways, especially for the disadvantaged. And he was fundamental in getting Head Start kind of into the Great Society. So if you have a chance, just check it out. It's a short read. I don't have any assignments connected to it, but I thought it was just a nice resource to have. That's a little bit on one. Let me see. Do I have? Oops. Sorry, I'm toggling here. I'm on my home computer instead of my work computer, so I'm kind of a little lost. Few other things that I wanted to make point of. We talked about the politicization and the hyper politicalization, which is probably going to step up even more this year now that we're in an election year. Chapter 2, I don't know how much I talked about this. I mean, I do, but I just want to reiterate something. She talks a lot in the readings, and I have my book over here, and I'm actually looking at a page related to this right now. She talks about teacher quality in Flat World. And one thing I do want to make note, I think she's talking, especially in the chapters that we just read or went through, she talks a lot about New York and how they have a lot of first and second year teachers. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be good teachers. And I think that's an important point to make. Some of it is experience. Maybe they don't have as many of those lead teachers. And also, she talks a little bit about teacher preparation programs. And obviously, I can speak a little bit onto that because I work in the Shepherd education preparation program. I think there's a lot of different ways to get quality teachers. It's just a lot of it is preparation. It's putting money into it. It's having good mentorship. It's things like that. I'm a product. I have a history degree, finished in the mid 90s, went to WVU, went through their education program and got my master's, which is what a lot of people in this class are probably doing. I think it's a wonderful way, especially in secondary and elementary education. You have strong content knowledge. You can make connections. I think it's awesome. I think the traditional undergraduate way is great. You get a lot of hours, a lot of preparation for that. Today, we're being asked to do this a lot, the alternative certification programs. I think different schools have different quality on that. But I will say this, states are getting more and more involved, and I think the quality of them is definitely going up. So I think there's a lot of ways to get quality teachers. A lot of it is I think once they get out in the school, how much support they're getting and things like that. Again, she talks about all that. But again, it's a very important thing. And one of the big questions I asked in this chapter when I was reading it, I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom, is this, what is a quality educator? What are we looking for? What are the skills? What are the training? When I started teaching, I thought that my students would just know through osmosis because I loved history so much that they would learn. That's not the case. I needed teaching skills. I needed methodology. I needed delivery methods. It all comes back to methodology. And then I could take advantage of my content knowledge and make it more efficient. So that's just me. I think there are skills and training that are needed. And I always ask my methods class, what is more important, content knowledge or having teaching skills? Once upon a time, I would say content knowledge. If you have strong teaching skills, I think elementary educators probably can speak on this more than anyone. You can usually, I don't want to say you can teach anything, but you're pretty comfortable at least getting the delivery out unless it's really high level stuff. There's some people that disagree with that statement, though, and I'm not trying to poo-poo anyone's opinion, but I definitely think there's some skill sets, and it's hard. I feel like it's terms of teacher quality, and again, this is something she talks about. I never felt like I hit my stride or really knew what I was doing until my third year. I don't want to say I wasn't like bumbling or anything, but everything just slowed down, and I felt like once I kind of started getting that third year, everything started to make sense. In terms of teacher quality, we're losing people so fast. I know people who finish our programs, any of our programs, in a couple of years, they're out. And why is that happening? And I think that all falls back into teacher quality. I guess I'm asking questions more than I'm actually stating anything, but that's what she's getting into in the reading. Also, this relates to chapter 3, and I'll just kind of jump right into it, but the foundations are laid in chapter 2, and that's the socioeconomic factor. There is a big correlation between success and schools that are seen as more affluent versus schools that just don't seem to have the funding. Of course, she cites numerous Supreme Court cases in all of these chapters. We're going to actually look at a lot of these in the coming weeks, so I'm not going to get too bogged down. But again, and I think I mentioned it last week, A lot of this is rooted in the old Plessy versus Ferguson separate but equal, and then Brown versus the Board of Education, which overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, where schools are supposed to have equality to them. Do they? That's a whole other, topic. I mentioned last week, I don't even think I put the link up, and I said I would. I'll double check, but I mentioned Little Rock High School, I believe, when I did the first video. If I didn't, I must be thinking of another class, but I'm going to put the video up anyway and just say Little Rock High School was the one that in the 50s they had to have National Guard to set in segregation in the school. Today, there's still, I hate to use the word segregation. There's definitely a different divide though in the school where there are the haves and the have-nots, so to speak, in terms of finances and such. And there's almost no middle class. So there's issues going on there, and a lot of that again comes back to money, home support, um, things like that. And again, that comes back to the 60s and the war on poverty and things like that, and trying to bring things up. It's all connected. The other thing, kind of related to this also is, and I thought this was an important point. She talks about, and this is more in 2 than it is 3, but when Darling Hammonds talks about the concept of bottom heavy courses, where if you go into maybe affluent schools or schools that seem to have high test scores and all, there's high level courses. You might have more AP courses and things like that, or more honors courses. Where if you go to schools that seem to have more a lower socioeconomic average, they're just base level courses. And there's nothing wrong with that. You need that, but there's just not options for the students. So there's not, I guess, a carrot to chase or a way to get strong subject and content level knowledge for the students who want to push through. So there's a lot of, balls in the air, so to speak, when you're doing this. And she gets in that too. This is something I think is a good one. I may actually throw this up there on one of the discussion boards in the coming weeks. But what is a quality educator and what are the gaps and all? With that being said, I mentioned chapter 3, and she talks about teaching to the test, and and this all relates back to the case with the low income, and I put with there for some reason, but with low income, and there's definitely a divide in terms of equality. And this may seem a little off base, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. If you've ever watched the show The Wire, they do a season, and I think it's season 4. Um, it really delves into this a little bit. It's a hard watch. It's a fantastic show. It's set in Baltimore, in inner city Baltimore. The first 3 years, they kind of do a theme each season where one season's about politics, one's about workers on the dock. The 4 seasons about the education, and really a lot of it is set in the school system. And they do a whole thing about teaching on the test. That's not a whole episode, but it comes up a lot. Um, and a lot of this is seen as socioeconomic, racial, and things of that, where the scores in those areas are lower, and it's instituting C&I changes that may not be beneficial for students. As someone, again, I always say it, but as someone who teaches social studies, I mean, I've seen it in states and counties where it gets cut, but yet we talk about social studies all the time. There's an election coming up. Same thing with or the arts. There are some schools that are cutting more and more art programs or PE and things like that. And I'm not saying other subjects aren't important. It's just, a balance is good, and good education integrates, and there's cross curricular activities and things like that. I had trouble spitting that one out. So again, she talks about that. Um, and sometimes she talks about the portfolio system and sometimes assessing students. She talks about this on page 68. I don't actually have that one pulled up. I was flipping through, but but in terms of class content, not eliminating class subjects themselves, maybe getting that integration, so to speak. And I think it was a controversial thing when it came. I think in some regards, I think the core curriculum was trying to do some of this. It was, um, but sometimes also less is more. Again, I don't know what subjects everyone teaches. I think from reading backgrounds, there's a lot of secondary people in this class. But even if you're in elementary, I think you definitely will see it. Sometimes I think with standards, we almost try to hit the ground. I talked about hitting the ground running. I think we do almost information dumps on students. And she talks a little bit about that. You've got to build that base level stuff. My son's in high school, and I think about this sometimes with math. And if there's any math teachers in here, I could be totally wrong with what I'm saying, but we see it with our students sometimes that come in through the undergraduate program, where they may have had AP calculus, but then when they take, I don't know, the praxis or something like that, they struggle in the math section, and they're kind of, and justifiably so, they're confused because they have completed like a cal class. Um, well, that might be because they got through the class, but because there's certain standards, the teacher can't stop. They just keep going, so the concepts aren't learned properly. And I guess it gets back into that. What I'm saying is sometimes I talked about higher level classes, but you still have to make sure that those foundational classes are met and not just trying to check a box on a standard. I get it. I've done the same thing. And it's just, I think sometimes the less is more. It's just better sometimes if the students understand the concept. Is it that bad if a student is in algebra in 10th grade? Probably not if they learn it. Um, I would say it's not, but there's a stigma to it and things like that. And she gets into that. And all. So it's an important chapter. I think it's very interesting. It also talks about, again, I said I wouldn't mention any Supreme Court cases, but she does get into the case in Arizona where, the equality with ELL learners and things like that, and bringing that up. So if you have not read the chapter, especially chapter 3, it's very interesting. And I mentioned this, but the idea of certified versus not certified teachers, there's a huge discrepancy in pretty much all states, but between who has what schools that, if you broke them down according to race, which ones have certified teachers and which ones have teachers that are not certified. So that's it. As you can see, there's a law student chart too, where there's also this correlates with this, where in law students were students who either dropped out or were having trouble graduating, or just a lot of things. It's actually on page 95, as I note there. And actually, I was looking at it this morning, and let's see if I'm close to it. I'll pull it up right now. Well, maybe I will. I'm actually very close to it. If you give me a second, I'm going to pull it up, and I'm going to re-examine the chart. Well, maybe I will. Boop. Oh, 3 more pages. There we go. Yep. There we go. Law student chart. Sorry, I'm babbling slightly. There we go. Yes, actually, sorry, I wanted to make sure I had my numbers right. When you look at this, she's looking at early 2000 chart classes, but where in the state of Massachusetts, but it's Latino students especially were lost. And this comes back into the concept of the ELL and lack of communications and resources. And the chart that I'm referencing is actually between 9th and 10th grade. So definitely check it out. I talked about No Child Left Behind, so I'm not going to get too far into it, but it did update the Elementary and Secondary Act. It's a standard-based performance. It was a standard-based performance program. Basically, students had to meet certain checkpoints before they could move on. It was replaced, as it says there, by Every Student Succeeds Act. 4, I'm not going to get too much into, because I think I'm going to show you a different reading with the alignment, but the concepts are very much true. And a lot of this gets into, she starts to talk about other countries, and that's why I don't want to get too far into this, because we're going to do that with the finished lessons book. But Darling Hammonds, always have trouble spitting that out. I always want to say Hammonds Darling Hammonds. She talks about how a lot of other countries have flexibility in their program, and I think that's what I was kind of getting to or bumbling towards with the math programs. And by the way, English, social studies, all things where it's more about learning the skills and not worrying about any stigma about whether you're moving onwards or not. And having a flexibility in designs that kind of meet the students. And she talks a lot about that. She also talks about how money is spent. She does a lot of charts. She talks about DC. I threw up there the DC example, the one that I had, and of course I just jumped back. But she talks a good bit about New Jersey and how much money is spent, again, in different regions of New Jersey, and different areas and such. So definitely check it out. If you follow the money, you can usually follow which schools are doing well and which ones aren't. I don't think that probably applies in pretty much 95% of life. But it kind of gets in there. She does talk about the Brown versus Board of Education. That's the one which ended Plessy versus Ferguson. I've said that multiple times. And one thing you got to think about with this chapter is how do we change the mindset of where money is spent? Should we? Well, that got me thinking. And when I'm reading the book, The Flat World of Education, again, I love the concepts. But again, the book is a little bit, like I say, long in the tooth. So what I did was, I was trying to find some updated numbers. I am going to actually pull this up. I will put this link. As you can see, I have no free articles left, so I didn't want to close it. But I will put the link because you'll have a free article left. Those are the numbers as of the summer of 2023. This article came out in June of 2023. But we spend $809 billion on education. I always see the bumper stickers, more, we shouldn't have a, what was it? We shouldn't need to have a bake sale we need to have a bake sale to buy a jet or something like that. I messed that up. But I will say it's about even between this and defense. Now, there's a whole debate whether that should be the case or not, but $809 billion is what we spend on education. About 11% roughly comes from federal sources in certain areas. A lot of it comes from state funds. Some of it comes from state taxes, federal funds, but you can kind of break it down. Everyone can read. There's only 2 states, and I have to admit, I was a little surprised. I did not see West Virginia on here because I always wonder, where we come on things. But there were only 2 states that get 19% or more of their annual education funding from the federal government, and that was actually South Dakota and Mississippi. As you can see, that's the amount we spend on students on an average nationwide, around $14,000-$15,000. As you can see, here's the spending since then. So when this book came out, we were spending about $10,000 per student. And of course, now we're up to $14,000. But as has been in the news, there's been a lot of inflation and things like that. And again, you can read most of these, but here's the number. There's 5 states that spend $20,000 or more on students, and DC is also in there. And as you can see, I think this kind of relates to what she was writing about in the book. But Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, it's these Northeast states. They're fun. They're rooted. That's the old Horace Mann, if you remember from your educational foundations courses, those old Horace Mann area, that Northeast. So $20,000 in those areas. And 82%, rough percentage of education that went towards salaries and benefits for staff. So about 82% of the funding goes towards salaries and staff. Again, you can talk about, do we need more money to get facilities in our teacher pay? Look across the states. I'm sure a lot of you right now are teaching. I think we have people from Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia in here, and just the discrepancy in pay between those states. We have tons of students in our programs that go over to Maryland or Virginia because of pay. So anyway, I'm not saying anything revolutionary there. But again, you can check all this out. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. I'll put the link up there. And then you can actually look at different states as far as, click on each students. In West Virginia, we spend about $13,000. So we're close to the national average. I do think I do like to look at graphs. It does look like, if you look here in the Northeast, a lot of dark blue, which I think are the higher ones. And then the lighter blue. We're not as you can see, Florida is a little around 10,000. They're in the news a lot right now because of education. Mississippi is 10,000. That seems to be kind of the lower end. We're not quite as West Virginia in a lot of things seems to kind of, what is it? Thank goodness for Mississippi in a lot of things. I've heard people say it doesn't look like we're quite there. We're a little bit middle of the road. So, but with that being said, that is the overview of that. And I'm sorry if I was a little quick. I just wanted to make sure to kind of be respectful of time. And also, I'll pull this up. One thing I want you to be, we're not a methodology course per se, but I do think it's something to keep in mind. And they do talk about this in the book, and they're going to talk about it in the finished book too. The competence for culturally responsive teaching, this kind of gets into the idea of teaching and making those connections with students and maybe being more quality style teachers. And it's kind of looking at things through, cultural lenses. You'll see this in a lot of things. I went ahead and put it up. I'll probably move into that a little more next week. But if you want to check it out ahead of time, go for it. I actually have what the chart hopes to accomplish here. I did not put where I had got that from. I'll make sure to add that. I thought I had included it. That I did not type that up. That was a nice breakdown from a page. Um, I think it was from actually Educational World. So just to give a shout out. But again, it's just to make those bonds and starting to see things through different issues and all. And like I say, um, it's that I've mentioned the wire. That is one of those things where one of the teachers is actually starting to see that as he's starting to teach in an inner city school, and maybe education. There's a lot of hurdles to go through, and there's a lot of different ways to help students, and maybe see things not through just your own point of view. So again, so with that being said, check it out, culturally res- responsive teaching. And let me jump on down here. If you look, I also put an article from Jonathan Kozel. She mentions in Flat World Jonathan Kozel a lot. He can be he can be a decisive figure sometimes, but he is definitely a big name. I may have mentioned him briefly in that last week, but there's a New York Times or New York Times. Um, it's an LA Times article that he wrote, and he's someone who went into the Northeast. He spent a lot of time in a lot of Northeast schools, especially inner city schools, and started to identify the issues with funding and things like that. So you might want to check it out. Um, by the way, you don't have to worry about the discussion. I don't know, or introduction. I think everyone did that. I'll make sure to get that off of there. Also, since I might talk more about this next week. But I mentioned the culturally responsive edge teaching. Again, it was something that was in the news a lot. There was a lot of discussion about it, but the 1619 project, I did put an article on that from the New York Times, and talks about maybe teaching. Again, I can't help it. I taught social studies, but it was something about teaching history and maybe looking at it from a different lens, so to speak. It was, I hate to use, I guess it was controversial. I guess that's the right word to use, where there were historians that came out against it. There were some schools that weren't adopting it. There were schools, districts that were adopting it. I think some places have adopted aspects of it. But if you want to check it out, you can. Again, I'll reference it next week. Um, that is kind of the content. Make sure that you check out. The big thing this week is just to make sure you have discussion two done. I will make sure that there it is. It's the political aspects. Make sure you have 200 words. And next week, not this week, but I'm going to go ahead and post this. You have an assignment. I'm going to go here. It's the Zen project assignment. Let me go ahead and go here. And whoops, that's everyone that's in the class. When you look at the assignment, and I will show you, there is an attachment. What I want you to do with this site, I'm going to move my face here real quick so I can see something. What I want you to do with this assignment is I want you to go to the Zen project. I'll pull it up and actually give you a little background on that here in a second. But Howard Zinn was someone who, again, I mentioned a TV show. I might as well mention a movie. If you've ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting, the Robin Williams character actually is talking to the Matt Damon character. And Matt Damon actually, his characters actually mentions that he's reading a book called A People's History of the United States. It's a very famous book. You can find it in any bookstore. But it talks about diversity and how we teach, well, not teach, but how we teach history or teach lessons in general. And but the book itself, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, actually does the history of the United States from the point of view of citizens. It's not hero history, so to speak. It's not just the presidents and then go from there and break off. But I digress. The reason why I want you to do this is not like a social studies assignment. If you go to, there's a site, he's passed on, but if you go to, it says A People's History, but if you go to their site, there's a whole bunch of lessons, and they are in different themes, different subject areas, things like that. So for example, if we were going to do, I don't know, colonial history, well, that seems pretty, let's do this. Let's do 20th century. And if you look, there's a whole bunch of things on here at different content areas. What I want you to do is go through and just check the site out. I'll pull up, there's a chart, that you can just fill in. I want you to kind of look at different things that might apply to something that you could teach in your subject area. Doesn't have to be social studies or anything like that. Again, I don't want this to seem like I'm just pushing that. But like if you're looking for something like sciency, maybe you'll go to the environment and there's clips, there's guides, there's things like that. So we'll do, I don't know, let's do film clips. And there's a word search. And if you click go, there are different clips there and you can kind of check them out and they'll talk about it. All I want you to do is kind of check this site out. I'd like you to find 20 sources that you think you could potentially use. And if you can't, if you cannot find 20, just find some that you find that are interesting, or maybe you could steal aspects of in a lesson. But I'd like you to just put what the theme is, and that would be, environment, mathematics, colonialism, whatever. What's the resource? Again, that's the clips or whatever that were on there. And just a diversity connection can just be a sentence or two, like just what it does, like maybe teaching from a Native American lens, or bringing in some issues related to socioeconomic spending or something like that, or something, just a sentence or two, just a summary. I'm just kind of check it out to see how you can do that. Again, this is not due this week. This is due the following week. But if you want to go ahead and get started, I thought I'd go ahead and put it on there. So again, that's it for this week. It is just the discussion. I wanted to get everyone kind of rooted and going. But if you want to go ahead and get going on the Zen project, you can. That, everyone, I think is the week. I think I've already went over what I promised. So I'll go ahead and sign off. If you have questions, I know I talk quick. I think there's a lot. I think in a live class, I will say there are benefits that you can. I feel like I don't want to. We can kind of break off and have discussions a little bit on some of these. We're going to do that on the discussion board, though. So I'm just babbling. I am going to sign off. I hope everyone has a good week. And please email if you have any questions, or stop by my office if you're on campus. And again, intros were great. It was great to see. I will say we have a very diverse backgrounds on everything. I think I sent an email out, but it was kind of cool to see. So with that being said, I'm going to stop the share and tell everyone to have a fantastic weekend. So, or week.